Okay, good morning, wifey. First of all, sorry. I don't know if you could tell because Jason thinks it doesn't look like a big deal, but I think it looks pretty big. You said you didn't think it looked that bad. Oh. Alright, well, anyway, I'm sure this is distracting, but yesterday I was on a walk and a bug flew into my mouth and stung me. And my lip is swollen. Okay, I'm gonna try not to stare at myself when I do this MarcoPolo. But, we didn't have school yesterday or today because of the hurricane. We do have school again tomorrow. So I just woke up and I'm just gonna do like an initial MarcoPolo in response. And then, I want you to give me feedback if this is actually what you're trying to get me to say before I say more, basically. So going into Thornridge, being that the students were almost all black, my fears and concerns were, I think one fear that I had was that, like, I wouldn't be taken seriously by my students. And what I mean by that is, like, I wouldn't be, like, relatable to them. And so because they couldn't relate to me, maybe they couldn't learn from me. And I think that the main reason that was a fear is because when I was doing New Teacher Academy, I'm sure you remember this as well, because I think we've talked about this before, but I remember being told that our current superintendent didn't think that white people could teach black students. So that really was like, oh no, maybe I can't. So that was a fear, or a concern, just that, like, there was an inherent thing about me being white that was not overcomable, and my students wouldn't, like, I wouldn't be able to teach them since they're black. I think another fear was, like, I was very afraid that I was so young and my students were so close to my age because I was 22 teaching seniors. I was very afraid of being accused of inappropriate relationships with my students. I was very afraid of, like, being perceived a certain way by students and my coworkers. Which some of that honestly was real. I got asked to prom 3 times my first year of teaching. I got asked out, period, a lot. So that was real. And then I think another fear was just, like, based on my experience student teaching, I was at Waukegan for student teaching, and I had a pretty good mixture of students who were Latino, students who were white, and students who were black. And I really liked and then connected with my black students, which is why I chose to teach at a school that was all black, or majority black students. At the same time, I did have some students who were black who, like, I didn't feel like I could control their behavior. So even though it was my choice to teach at the school I taught at and I was excited about it, I definitely was afraid, like, I wouldn't be able to manage the behaviors. of some students who would really challenge me. And so I think because I was afraid I couldn't manage their behavior, I tried really hard to come off really strong. Which I would say that even as I evolved as a teacher, I still would start the school year pretty strong, but me coming off strong changed a lot as far as like what I would actually say and my attitude. So by nature, I am non-confrontational, or I don't know if I'm non-confrontational, but I don't really seek out confrontation. And also by nature, I'm not quick-witted. So that was like very glaringly apparent when I first started teaching. Like, I don't have a comeback ever. I never know what to say back to a student. And when they challenge me, my first tendency is to freeze up, not to engage. So I don't know if I even was very self-aware ahead of time, but those were two big problems that I immediately encountered as far as classroom management was concerned in my first year of teaching. Like, I'm not quick-witted, and I freeze up when I'm challenged. So some ways that I combated that specifically was coming up with phrases that I would always say back. And those phrases changed over the years. But at first, one of the big phrases that I used for classroom management was, "I'm talking, you're not." Like, if a student was talking, I would say, "I'm talking, you're not." I also, being non-confrontational, would often address the whole class for a problem that I was only seeing in one student, rather than addressing that student face to face. And I think that was fear. I was afraid of what that student might say back to me. And that I would like lose the fight, basically, because they would say something that I would freeze up and like not be able to respond. And I was afraid once I lost my authority, because, that's something that's definitely taught to new teachers. Like, if you lose it, you can never get it back, and the first day of school is so important, and all that kind of stuff. So, I was very afraid of like going toe to toe with a student. Some things that helped me, number one was I had students who could tell I really cared, and they would give me feedback. Like, they would stay after class and be like, "I know you meant this, but you said that, and maybe you could try this other, like maybe you could try this instead." And that was helpful. Me and Golden used to go out to eat like 3 times a week after work. And she would vent to me and I would vent to her. And we would like bounce ideas off of each other. And she taught me a lot about her own experience at Thornridge. And just like her experience as a Black woman. I learned a lot from her, just from basically being willing to be vulnerable with her so that she could really help me, and tell her what was really happening in my classroom. Because I do think that that's something that can stop a teacher's growth, even if it doesn't have to do with race, but especially if it has to do with race. If a person doesn't have a safe person that they can really say what really happened in their classroom, they can never move past it, and they can never like learn from it. So that was critical, super critical, in my growth. And a big thing that I think made me the Miss Broger that you give so much praise to, which thank you for all of your kind words, was like, I guess somewhat of a change in philosophy of like how to manage a classroom. So instead of just like, I need to be in control, and if I'm not in total control, then whoever is taking away that control from me must be squashed. And instead saying like, there is a very important thing that needs to happen in this classroom, which is learning. And so if that's my number one goal, is I have to be able to teach. And the only way that I'm actually a teacher is if my students are actually learning. I'm not a teacher if I'm just spouting information and my students aren't really learning it. So I'm only a teacher. I'm only good at my job. The only thing that actually is a good measure of whether or not I'm a good teacher is if my students are actually learning. And so I really had to like question, are my methods going to help my students learn? So for example, if I'm always saying I'm talking, you're not, yeah, they're quiet, but did I, just like shut them down? And now like they're really not even going to pay attention to me because they're annoyed with me or mad at me or embarrassed or whatever. So my like approach to my students turned more into, your learning is extremely important to me. That's the reason I'm here. I'm here because I want you to learn. I'm here because I believe you can learn. And I'm here to teach you something really important. And every time you walk through my door, what you're saying to me is, I want to learn what you have to teach me. And so since you walked through my door, I'm going to make sure you learn what I have to teach you because you're telling me that you want to learn it. And so if there was a behavior issue, I didn't just, well, first of all, I felt very much more comfortable addressing the student personally because it wasn't a threat to me. It was actually a threat to themselves because they need to learn, and what they're doing right now is gonna block them from learning. And so you matter to me. You as a person, you individual, you matter to me, and your learning matters to me. And so I have to address you. I have to personally address you, not just the whole class. I can't afford to be afraid to confront because then I'm losing you as a learner. So I think that kind of shift definitely happened over time, but one of the biggest reasons that it happened was because I had so much freedom and safety to say what was really going on in my classroom and get real feedback on like what was happening also in Golden's classroom, especially that first year of teaching. And it really helped me also to hear that Golden was having some of the same challenges as me, being that she was a black woman. It helped me kind of like, okay, I can drop that fear that it's just because I'm white. I think my challenges were sometimes amplified because I'm white. Because I had that extra like barrier to overcome, or like that extra perception in my students' minds that I had to kind of break through about who they thought I was. But the more I was able to communicate to my students that they mattered, and that they can learn, and that they will learn when they come into my classroom, then that's how they knew I cared. And like, that's how they knew after school, if they had a problem, they could come talk to me. Like, I truly, my methods were much different from Golden's. Golden's a storyteller. She's a history teacher. She often would share anecdotes about her own life in her teaching, and she still does. I sometimes share anecdotes about my own life in my teaching, but honestly, I rarely do. If I think it's relevant, I'll share it. But for me personally, I found the most success and the most openness from my students by first proving to them that they can learn in my classroom, and that's our number one priority, is their learning. And that I believe they can. And so since I believe you can learn, you are going to learn. And I'm going to explain it 100 times if I have to. I'm going to find different ways to explain the content. I'm going to find different ways for you to practice the content. But at the end of the day, you're going to leave here knowing this stuff. And then like through that, my students could tell that I cared, and they were open to me. I still remember one student I had who was extremely helpful to me, and I've told her this since she graduated, but growing up, I always said "what" when someone said my name. And so in the classroom, kids say your name like 100,000,000 times a day. And they'd say, "Miss Broger," and I'd say, "What?" "Miss Broger, what?" "Miss Broger, what?" And for a whole school year, this girl, every single time I said Miss Broger, or every time I said "what," she would say, "Don't say what, it's rude." And she didn't say it meanly. And she didn't say it loud to like make other people like laugh at me, but she just kept saying it, like, "Don't say what, it's rude. Don't say what, it's rude." And I really respected her approach to try to help me not be rude. 'Cause to me, I wasn't being rude. To me, I was just saying what I've always said. But looking back, like, I was rude because my tone of voice was like almost like annoyed, or like, "I actually don't have time for your question, so what? Hurry up." So because of her, now when someone says my name, I say yes. So I think definitely my willingness to be receptive to correction, and learning from my colleagues and from my students was really, really important. But one of the most difficult things, and I don't know if it's I kind of feel like it is cultural, but maybe I'm taking too much liberty. But I think a lot of times as a white person, when you hear a black student talking about something that you've never personally experienced, you feel very hesitant to comment on it because you don't want to say the wrong thing. You don't want to be like, you don't want to sound ignorant. You don't want to sound like you really have no idea what you're talking about. And so a lot of white teachers, I've noticed, and I did notice it in myself early on in my teaching as well. A lot of white teachers will hear a black student say something that's actually really concerning, like a life experience, like a story that they're telling to their friend, or an insult that they're saying to their friend that's really inappropriate. And a lot of white teachers will be silent, and they don't address that behavior or that comment. And I think a lot of it is based on like being afraid of saying the wrong thing, or being afraid of being perceived wrongly. And so, again, something that I had to just like learn over time and believe was that it's important and it's critical for me to say something, even if I don't say it right. But to ignore what you hear is to say to the student that you don't care. So even if my students are saying a story about what happened last night and it's like really disturbing, I still will say something like, hey, that sounds like it was kind of scary. Are you okay? And they might at first be like, yeah, I'm fine. Like, I wasn't even talking to you, or, you know, they don't want to look weak in front of their friends or something like that. But they know that I care, and they're almost always gonna come back later and say it keeps happening, or, you know, like whatever. Now they know they have a person that cares and hears them and cares enough when they hear it to say something about it. And that, I think, is really important. I'm looking at the questions. Oh, I definitely think that's how I created a safe space, was never ignoring things, but also not embarrassing a student or like putting, you know, whatever I just heard them say, like saying it really openly, but never ignoring what you hear. You know, you don't have to make everything a huge deal, but don't ignore it, because they know you heard them. And when you don't say something about it or address it, you're very clearly communicating that you don't care. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at that. That was really long, Polo. And tell me if that's the kind of stuff you want me to say, or if there's something that you want me to expand upon. Okay. The gestational diabetes is going well. I'm still following the diet. I have an ultrasound next week to see if he's growing properly. I'm sure he is growing properly. It's a standard ultrasound. But since starting my diet for gestational diabetes, I've only gained about 1 pound in like 3 weeks or a month. So it's kind of weird. But my stomach is definitely still getting a lot bigger. And he kicks a ton. So I'm assuming everything's okay. But it's kind of weird how I haven't gained hardly any weight. Excuse me. I will reach out to the ladies who are planning my shower. It's funny that you said that. Like, you wanted to know if there was anything they needed, because I was actually going to tell them that you were coming, and that you're like the one person who's a guest at the shower who, like, you were my bridesmaid, you're one of my best friends, so if there's anything they need, they should ask you. And you just confirmed to me that that's what I should do. So that's pretty funny. And I'm not surprised at all. Okay, well, I hope you have a great day at school. I think maybe you already have students. Starting maybe yesterday was your first day, but I'm not sure. But I hope you have a great day. Love ya. Bye.